My parents sold my inheritance to pay my sister's wedding expenses after I paid their medical bills. I cut them off forever without warning. My parents sold my inheritance to pay my sister's wedding expenses after I paid their medical bills. I cut them off forever without warning. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I've always tried to do the right thing for my family. Until I realized my loyalty had limits. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the quiet kid who took care of chores, helped my parents with bills, and tried to keep the household running smoothly. I worked long hours at a corporate job, saved diligently, and made sure that if anything went wrong, I was there to fix it. I never asked for recognition. The satisfaction of doing what was right was enough. Or at least, that's what I told myself. My parents, however, had their favorites. My younger sister, Emily, was their golden child. Every little achievement of hers was celebrated with excitement, good grades, small promotions at her first job, even her weekend trips to the city were praised endlessly. Meanwhile, my own accomplishments were often met with a polite nod or a quick, "That's nice, son." I learned early on to brush it off, but it stung more than I liked to admit. I told myself it didn't matter. Family loyalty meant sacrifice, not recognition. Over the years, I covered the mounting medical bills when Dad had a minor surgery and later Mom's recurring checkups. I helped with emergency repairs around the house, paid off unexpected expenses, and occasionally lent money for things I knew weren't my responsibility. I never complained, but I noticed the subtle difference in how my sister's needs were prioritized. "Don't worry, your sister's wedding comes first," my mom said casually one evening while discussing plans for Emily's future, as if my contributions were invisible. I nodded, forcing a smile, but a quiet frustration settled in my chest. I wondered when or if my sacrifices would ever be acknowledged. Still, I clung to the belief that fairness would prevail, that doing the right thing would eventually earn me respect and gratitude. I didn't realize that my generosity was being quietly taken for granted, and that the storm I was about to face was already gathering by the time I went to bed that night. Staring at the ceiling, I felt a growing knot in my stomach, the sense that something was about to tip, but I had no idea just how much my life was about to change. I've always known my sister Emily had a way of charming everyone around her. She could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention, effortlessly drawing smiles and praise. It wasn't that I disliked her, I genuinely loved her, but over the years, I started noticing a pattern. Every little success she had, no matter how small, became the family's focus. A good grade, a weekend trip with friends, even the way she dressed for a partyette was always a celebration. And while I quietly handled bills, emergencies, and the endless grind of adult responsibilities, my own achievements were barely acknowledged. One evening, I overheard my parents talking about Emily's upcoming plans. "We just want her wedding to be perfect," Mom said, her voice soft but firm. "It's her special day, after all. She deserves every bit of it." I stayed in the hallway, pretending not to listen, but my chest tightened. My mind raced. I had spent months helping pay off their medical bills, taking time off work for emergencies, and covering extra household expenses. Yet every word of praise was reserved for her. I confronted Emily once, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Do you ever think about how much I've done for this family?" I asked, hoping for a spark of acknowledgement. She just smiled innocently. "Of course, I know, big brother. But Mom and Dad, you know how they are. They just get excited sometimes." Her casual tone hit me like a slap. It wasn't malice. It was entitlement, and it stung worse because it was subtle, wrapped in sweetness. That night, I sat alone in my room, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound. I thought about every bill I'd paid, every sleepless night, every small act of sacrifice. Was it too much to ask for a little recognition? A simple thank you. Instead, Emily's life was constantly spotlighted. While I became invisible, my efforts quietly assumed I told myself it didn't matter. I kept helping, kept sacrificing, keeping my focus on what was right rather than what was fair. But deep down, a small, burning resentment was starting to grow, and I had no idea it was about to boil over in ways I couldn't yet imagine. By the time I turned off the lights, I couldn't shake the thought, how long am I going to keep letting this happen? By the time I hit 28, I was practically running the family finances alone. Between paying off Dad's hospital bills and covering Mom's recurring medical checkups, I barely had time to breathe, let alone think about myself. Every extra dollar I earned went straight back into the household, or to cover emergencies that Emily somehow always managed to skirt around. I didn't complain, at least not aloud, but I felt the quiet weight of my own sacrifices pressing on me like a heavy coat I couldn't remove. One Friday evening, I was sorting through the bills when Mom wandered into my office. "Don't forget, Emily's engagement party is coming up," she said, casually flipping through papers like it was the most normal thing in the world. "We want her to have everything perfect. You'll help, won't you?" I froze mid-sentence, gripping the pen in my hand. I wanted to ask her why my efforts never seemed to matter, but instead I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Of course, Mom, I'll make it work," I said, though my voice felt hollow. Emily herself breezed into the room, humming like nothing was wrong. "Thanks for covering my tuition last month, by the way," she said, slipping past me to grab a snack. I wanted to say anything, but she was gone before the words could form. It was like I was invisible, a ghost in the family I was holding together. The more I gave, the more they expected. I even skipped a weekend trip with friends to cover an unexpected plumbing repair in the house, only to overhear my parents discussing how much they hoped Emily's wedding would be unforgettable. My own life felt like a ledger. Every effort noted but never celebrated, every sacrifice quietly assumed as a given. That night, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop, staring at my bank statements, calculating how much I'd spent supporting them over the past year. My chest tightened, a mix of exhaustion and frustration building in me. Something didn't feel right, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that my loyalty was being exploited. And yet, even as I scrolled through the wedding plans online, imagining the extravagant decorations and gifts, a voice in my head whispered, "Maybe this is just what family is. Maybe this is normal." But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Something was coming, and it wasn't going to be small. A few weeks later, the tension started creeping in like a shadow I couldn't shake. I had been balancing work, bills, and household emergencies like clockwork, but something felt off. One evening, I was walking past the living room when I overheard my parents whispering on the phone. "We just need to make sure Emily's wedding is perfect." "Don't worry about him finding out," Mom said, her voice tight but excited. My heart sank. I stopped in my tracks, gripping the doorframe, pretending not to listen, but my stomach turned over. I wanted to confront them right then, to ask what they were hiding, but I didn't. I wasn't naive, I knew they had always been subtle manipulators, but hearing that phrase, "don't worry about him," hit differently. It was the first time I felt that my role as the responsible, loyal son was being deliberately sidelined. My mind raced. What could they be planning that I wasn't supposed to know? Later that night, Emily skipped by my room, bouncing on her heels like nothing was wrong. "Don't be stressed about wedding stuff," she said casually, glancing at me with that perfect, innocent smile. "Mom and Dad will handle it. You just keep doing your thing." Her words felt like a punch. Keep doing my thing. Was that all I was to them? A paycheck, a buffer. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the bills in front of me, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards as the house settled. But a gnawing anxiety had settled in, a quiet dread that maybe this time the stakes were higher than usual. Something was about to break. I went to bed staring at the ceiling, the whispers of my parents echoing in my head, wondering how long I could keep giving without being noticed, without being appreciated. That night, I realized with a sinking feeling that my generosity might not be enough this time, and as I drifted off to sleep, a single thought haunted me. I'm about to find out just how far they're willing to go, and it's going to hurt more than anything I've ever faced. I still remember the day I found out. I was in the home office, organizing some old documents. When I stumbled upon the papers, I never thought I'd see my own inheritance sold. My parents had quietly liquidated a portion of it to cover Emily's extravagant wedding expenses. The numbers stared back at me like daggers. My heart thudded so loudly, I thought the walls might hear it. I couldn't believe it. After everything I had done, paying off their medical bills, covering emergencies, putting my own life on hold, they had taken what was legally and morally mine and used it. Without a word, I confronted them immediately. "You sold my inheritance." Without even asking me, I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. Dad avoided my eyes, and Mom sighed, that familiar, condescending tone creeping in. "We're just doing what's best for the family," she said, It's your sister's special day. You should be happy she's getting what she deserves." Happy. I felt my stomach twist. All the sacrifices I'd made, all the bills I'd covered, didn't matter. Not one bit. Emily appeared behind them, casually smiling as if she had no clue what was happening. "Wow, this wedding's going to be amazing," she said lightly, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in the room. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she had no right to smile when my future had been quietly stolen. But I didn't. I just felt frozen, trapped in a nightmare that had been unfolding silently for years. I spent that night pacing in my room, the hum of the city outside barely registering. I felt betrayed in the purest sense. My loyalty, my sacrifices, and my trust had been exploited. The golden child had always been Emily, but now it was official. My parents had made it clear where their priorities lay, and as I lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a bitter knot settle deep in my chest. I knew something had to change, but the question was, how? The days after discovering my inheritance had been sold were some of the hardest of my life. I felt hollow, like the trust I had painstakingly built over decades had been ripped away in an instant. Every time I saw my parents, their smiles and casual conversation felt like daggers. A reminder that they had chosen Emily over me in the cruelest way possible. I wanted to scream, to shake them until they understood what they had done, but I also felt paralyzed partly by shock, partly by the weight of a lifetime of being the responsible one. I confided in a close friend over the phone. "I don't know if I can forgive them this time," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I've done everything for them, paid bills, fixed problems, sacrificed my own life, and they just took what was mine and handed it to her." There was silence on the other end before my friend spoke softly. "You've always been the backbone man, but sometimes people don't deserve your loyalty." Their words lingered with me, both comforting and heartbreaking. At home, the atmosphere was suffocating. Emily pranced around, talking about dress fittings, invitations, and flowers. Completely oblivious to the storm I was weathering inside. My parents acted as if nothing had happened, treating me like a reliable assistant rather than a son whose future had been undermined. Every conversation felt like manipulation, a subtle reminder that I was expendable, that my feelings didn't matter. I started sleeping poorly, waking in the middle of the night with a knot in my stomach. The hum of the city outside my window became a constant backdrop to my racing thoughts. I kept replaying that conversation. Mom's dismissive tone, Dad's averted gaze, Emily's innocent smile, it all merged into one gnawing, bitter pain that I couldn't shake. By the end of the week, I realized I had reached a crossroads. I could continue being used, continuing my silent sacrifices, or I could confront the reality that my parents and sister didn't see me as anything more than a provider. But even thinking about standing up to them filled me with dread, because I had no idea how they would react, and I feared what I might be forced to do. And as I sat alone in my room that night, staring at the darkened ceiling, I whispered to myself, something has to give on soon. I knew I couldn't keep letting this slide. After a week of sleepless nights and silent anger, I decided to confront my parents one last time, hoping reason could still reach them. I waited until dinner, the smell of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes filling the air, and tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about the inheritance," I said, placing my hands on the table to ground myself. Mom's eyes flicked up, sharp and guarded. "What about it?" she asked, her tone almost casual, like this was a minor inconvenience rather than the betrayal of decades. Dad leaned back, arms crossed, and gave me that familiar look that always made me feel like a child. "You've been working yourself too hard, son. Maybe you're just overthinking things," he said, as if my very outrage was proof of my immaturity. "I'm not overthinking," I replied, my chest tightening. "You sold my inheritance without telling me. You handed it to Emily for her wedding, after I covered your medical bills and countless emergencies. How is that fair?" My words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Emily, who had been scrolling on her phone in the corner, suddenly looked up, feigning innocence. "I didn't ask for this, she said lightly, but her words only made the anger inside me boil. It wasn't about hurt, it was about my parents' blatant disregard for me, their willingness to manipulate and exploit me without any accountability. Mom's response was infuriating. "We're doing what's best for the family," she said, voice rising slightly. You should be happy your sister's life is going well. That's what matters. I felt my hands shake, my stomach twist. Happy? I couldn't even feel happiness anymore. Only the bitter taste of betrayal. I left the room, barely keeping my composure, and shut the door to my room. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was deafening, echoing the emptiness I felt inside. I realized then that talking to them would get me nowhere. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource wallet with feelings. And as I stared at my reflection in the dark window, I knew something had to change. I can't keep giving to people who don't even see me. I have to take control. Somehow, after that confrontation, I realized I couldn't reason with them. My parents weren't going to see things from my perspective. Emily certainly wasn't going to apologize. For the first time, I felt something shift inside Mian. Undeniable clarity. If I wanted to protect myself, I had to make a decision that would hurt, but ultimately free me. I started quietly researching my options, looking through legal documents, inheritance laws, and ways to reclaim control over what was rightfully mine. Every evening, I sat at my desk with the soft glow of the lamp, reviewing bank statements and contracts, calculating what could be done without giving them a chance to manipulate me further. My mind was buzzing with strategy, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of empowerment amidst the anger. At the same time, the emotional side of it hit hard. Guilt crept in, whispering that maybe I was overreacting, that cutting ties would be drastic. But the nagging resentment, the countless times I'd been overlooked, manipulated, and taken for granted, drowned out any doubt. I thought about all the nights I'd spent alone, paying bills, fixing emergencies, quietly sacrificing only to be sidelined when it truly mattered. That pattern had to end. I watched Emily from across the room one evening, her laughter echoing in the kitchen as my parents fussed over wedding plans. A strange calm settled over me. This wasn't just about money, anymore it was about respect, boundaries, and finally, reclaiming my life from people who saw me as nothing more than a tool. I made a quiet decision. I would cut them off, completely, without warning. No arguments, no explanations. The moment I stepped into that path, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift slightly. The fear of confrontation was still there, but it was accompanied by an unfamiliar feeling. Power. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise. This is it. I'm done letting them take from me. Everything changes now, and even though I couldn't see exactly what would happen next, a sense of inevitable confrontation hung in the air, tense and unrelenting. The days leading up to my decision were some of the loneliest I've ever experienced. Every interaction with my parents and Emily felt like wading through quicksand, slow, suffocating, and impossible to escape. I was angry, yes, but beneath that anger was a gnawing emptiness. They didn't just betray me financially. They had dismissed every ounce of effort, every sleepless night, every sacrifice I'd made. I realized, painfully, that I wasn't just invisibly, was expendable. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, the faint hum of the city outside my window, doing nothing to calm me. I ran through every conversation, every bill I had paid, every time I had gone out of my way for them. My chest ached with exhaustion. My eyes burned from holding back tears. Why am I always the one who gives? I whispered into the empty room, my voice barely audible. Why does it always have to be me? Even my friends noticed the change. I couldn't hide the tension in my voice, the forced smiles, or the silent frustration that followed me everywhere. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was overreacting, if cutting ties would make me a villain instead of a victim. But deep down, I knew that if I didn't act, I would continue to be used and drained, slowly losing myself in the process. Emily, oblivious as ever, continued with her carefree life, chatting about dresses, invitations, and flowers, as if the inheritance wasn't just money I had earned, not a gift I'd willingly given. Each laugh, each casual remark, each tiny smile she directed at my parents stabbed at me, leaving invisible scars. The sense of betrayal wasn't just financial anymore, it was personal, intimate, and suffocating. That night, lying in the dark, I felt like I had reached the very bottom. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and filled with a quiet, burning rage. Every fiber of me screamed that something had to change. I couldn't go on like this not a single day longer. And as I finally closed my eyes, I whispered one word to myself over and over: enough. The morning I decided to cut them off, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I had rehearsed what I would say, or rather, what I wouldn't say. No explanations, no debates. I couldn't let them twist my words, guilt-trip me, or manipulate me one last time. Today, I would reclaim my life. I sat at the breakfast table, the aroma of coffee and toast filling the kitchen, and watched them chatter about Emily's wedding plans as if nothing had happened. My stomach tightened, but my resolve hardened. I cleared my throat. "I'm done," I said simply, my voice steady. "I'm leaving all contact to you from this point forward. I won't be a part of this family dynamic anymore." Mom froze mid-pour, spilling a little milk onto the counter. "What do you mean?" she asked, panic threading her voice. Dad's face went pale, his arms crossing automatically, a defensive wall I had known all my life. "Son, this is absurd. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, my tone calm but unyielding. "I've given enough. I've sacrificed enough, and I will not let my life, my future, be stolen again. Consider this my final word." Emily blinked, confused, her cheerful demeanor faltering for the first time. "Wait, you're serious?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, not a shred of doubt left. There was no anger in my expression, no only clarity. The rage I had carried for months had been transformed into quiet, unshakable power. They tried the usual tactics: bleeding, guilt-tripping, subtle manipulations, but I didn't respond. I packed a few essentials into my bag, the hum of the city outside louder somehow, a reminder that life moved forward even if they couldn't see it. Walking out the door, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. The invisible chains of expectation and manipulation were finally gone. For the first time in my adult life, I was walking toward a life I controlled entirely. As I looked back at the house one last time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders, but a flicker of tension lingered. I knew the repercussions would follow, and perhaps they would try to reclaim me in some way, but for now, I was untouchable. And as I stepped onto the street, the cool morning air filling my lungs, I whispered to myself, "This is my life, mine alone." The days after cutting them off were surreal. At first, there was silence from all sides: no calls, no messages, no attempts at reconciliation. It felt strange, almost eerie, as if the world had paused while I adjusted to my new reality. The absence of their manipulation, their constant expectations, and the silent judgment that had hung over me for decades was liberating. I finally had space to breathe, to think, to exist without anyone dictating the value of my sacrifices. I started reclaiming parts of my life I'd long neglected. Mornings no longer began with anxiety about unpaid bills or family emergencies. I could enjoy a cup of coffee in peace, focus on my career, and even take weekends off without guilt clawing at me. There was a strange, satisfying power in realizing that my boundaries once ignored or dismissed were now respected by one simple act: walking away financially. I stabilized myself. I restructured accounts, made plans for investments I had postponed for years, and even set aside a small fund for my own personal dreams, something I had never allowed myself before. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It was reclaiming what was mine, quietly and decisively. There was no need to gloat or prove a point. The empowerment came simply from taking control and refusing to be exploited anymore. I occasionally heard murmurs about Emily's wedding from mutual friends, or faint whispers that reached me through the grapevine. They tried to frame me as selfish, as if demanding respect and fairness was a crime. But I didn't care. Their opinions didn't define me anymore. I had learned the hard way that loyalty and sacrifice mean nothing when the people you give them to are incapable of appreciation. At night, I would sit by my window, the hum of the city filling the room, and reflect on what had happened. The anger had softened into clarity, the betrayal into a lesson. I felt a quiet pride in myself, in the strength it took to finally stand up and walk away. And as I closed my eyes each night, there was no guilt, no resentment, lingering, just a calm, unwavering certainty. I had reclaimed my life, and nothing could take that away. Months passed, and life began to feel lighter. The weight of their expectations, the quiet exploitation, the endless cycle of giving without acknowledgement, all of it had finally been lifted. I had built a new routine around myself, my own goals, my own happiness. The apartment I rented felt like a sanctuary, filled with things I loved rather than obligations I carried for others. Even the small sounds of the city outside my window, sirens, chatter, the hum of traffic, felt like music instead of noise, a reminder that the world moved on, and so could I. I reflected often on the betrayal, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The realization that my parents had prioritized Emily over me, despite everything I had done, could have broken me. But instead, it taught me boundaries, self-worth, and the quiet power of walking away. I understood now that some ties aren't meant to be mended, and sometimes leaving is the most loving act you can perform for yourself. Emily and my parents tried in subtle ways to reach me over the months, texts, phone calls, even mutual friends trying to mediate, but I didn't respond. There was no confrontation, no drama, no need. Their attempts were reminders of the past I had already left behind. Each ignored message reinforced my decision and strengthened the sense of control I finally had over my life. Financially and emotionally, I began rebuilding what was mine. I invested, I saved, I even indulged in things I had postponed for decades: travel, hobbies, small luxuries. I didn't need validation from them anymore. I was finally living life on my own terms, and it felt extraordinary. One evening, as I watched the sun set from my balcony, I whispered to myself, quietly but firmly, I survived. I set my boundaries. I am free. The anger and heartbreak that had consumed me had transformed into empowerment and peace. I had closed the chapter on a family that took too much, and in doing so, I had opened the door to a life that was entirely and finally my own. And in that quiet, golden light, I realized something profound. Freedom doesn't always come from others, it comes from having the courage to walk away.